The light of consciousness is the self. The light of consciousness is the nature of consciousness. It's what throws a light on everything. Without consciousness, how could there be anything? There's no awareness of anything. We might hypothesize that there is still something, but again, that hypothesis only exists in consciousness. So the nature of consciousness is light. It throws a light on everything. The light of consciousness is the self. Self is a troublesome word in some ways. In some ways, self has got absolutely nothing to do with us. It has got nothing to do with us in any way. On the other hand, it's our essential being. It's the essential being that transcends all notions that we've got about ourselves. I think in this one short sentence though, we've got the essence of realization. The light of consciousness is the self. It is when the notion of I arises in it that this creation comes into being. Once we start thinking about it, once we start thinking about consciousness, once we start thinking about anything, then we've got a notion about ourself. Thinking isn't possible unless you've got some kind of notion about yourself. This is where artificial intelligence comes aground. Following programmed instructions, following programmed sequences of logic is not thinking. Unless a machine has got a notion about itself, then it's not thinking. The philosophers and researchers into artificial intelligence seem to think that the appearance of thinking is just as good as thinking itself. And I suppose that's one approach they can take. There's a prize, I think, for inventing a program which people interact with through the computer. And the challenge is they're being asked to decide whether it's a program that they're interacting with or with somebody in another room who's actually chatting with them through the computer. And I dare say they'll come up with some very clever programs which might be able to fool us into believing that we're actually communicating with another person. Conversely, some people don't seem to be much better than machines, and you get the impression with some people that you're not really talking to a person. You're talking to a system of rigid notions. And I think that's because perhaps their sense of I is not very well developed, which isn't the same as being enlightened. Liberation happens when you let go of notions. Otherwise there's nothing to be liberated from. And the thing about these notions is that they're based on emotions. They're based on passionately held beliefs. All intellectual positions, all intellectual points of view are actually based on very strong emotions, very strong predispositions. This is the essence of thinking. The essence of thinking is an anxiety for intellectual understanding. This is what brings creation into being, is this existentially desperate need for understanding. It was expressed originally through mythology, superstitions, religion, and now it's expressed through science. It's also expressed through art, philosophy, whatever. All these are examples of our need to understand. It's seen as a good thing, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But that need to understand invokes our story-making facilities. And we have different ways of evaluating our stories, whether through the weight of tradition or through the weight of emotional appeal, or through the weight of scientific evidence. These are different ways of validating our stories. So the notion of I, the notion of a world, an external world, they're stories, and they come as a result of our desire to understand through conceptualization. Other than this notion, there is neither a creation nor a creator. Motion being the inherent nature of water, there is no flow of water in relation to itself. It is as it is, flowing water. Even so, consciousness is vast and stable like space, and is therefore not aware of a space within itself. When the same water is seen at a different time and place, the notion of motion arises. Even so, the awareness that arises in consciousness, in conjunction with the notions of time and space, gives rise to the notion of creation. Though in fact, since time and space are unreal, such creation is impossible, and the comparison of consciousness with water is inadequate. We can only take these things so far. Know that all that you experience in the name of mind, ego sense, intellect, etc., is nothing but ignorance. Ignorance is simply getting caught up in our stories and believing our stories to be real. Ignorance is simply limitation, and all thinking is ultimately limitation. This ignorance vanishes through self-effort. It means making the effort to question all these assumptions that we make. People might be inclined to question notions of their own identity, but notions of an external world? You must be mad. Of course there's an external world. Well, this is the sort of attitude which we meet within ourselves. It has to be challenged. To accept as obvious the notion of an external world is nothing but ignorance. This ignorance vanishes through self-effort. Half of this ignorance is dispelled by the company of the holy ones, 1/4 of it is destroyed by the study of scriptures, and the other 1/4 by self-effort. Well, it's really all by self-effort. But we need to bring that into our whole life. And how do we do that? We've got a formula here. But really what we need to do is use every opportunity we can to immerse ourselves in these teachings. If it's not the central focus of our life, then we're not going to get there. So the company of holy ones, this is half of our time. Well, there are a lot of teachers teaching this kind of thing, and they can certainly be explored, only from the point of view of their teaching though. The company of holy ones sounds fine, but inevitably you get caught up in some psychodynamic. How much of it is the teaching? How much of it is the personality? How much of it is the teacher's charisma? We must watch out for charisma. So it's the teachings we're really interested in, not the actual holy ones themselves. Basically, you just have to make the effort in whatever form possible. We've got huge resources now through the internet, massive amounts of books. We have a wealth of material available to us. But more importantly than being with teachers, more importantly than being with books, is to be applying this teaching. In fact, it's good to drop all books, teachers, teachings, and give yourself every opportunity to experience the fullness of your own sense of being. Just walk down the street. Walk down the street with your gaze on the ground, 6 feet in front of you, and take a look at what's going on.